Welcome to this new series of podcasts from Zscaler, Cybersecurity in the Age of AI. I'm your host, David Hull, the Editor-in-Chief here at Silicon UK. As we navigate the complexities of safeguarding our digital assets in an era dominated by artificial intelligence, it becomes increasingly evident that the democratisation of AI is reshaping the very foundations of security protocols and strategies. Are we now gatekeepers of our own digital security? In this episode, we're exploring the implications, challenges, and opportunities presented by the democratisation of AI security, from the democratisation of access to advanced AI-powered security tools to the democratisation of knowledge, expertise in utilising these tools to effectively offer a multifaceted aspect to the transformation of security as we know it today. Now, like I said, this is the second of three podcasts in this series. And once again, I am joined by the able Sam Curry, the Global VP and Chief Information Security Officer in Residence for the Zscaler. Welcome back, Sam.
It's good to be back. Thanks for having me, David.
Well, thanks a lot for joining us. I say the first one, I think we covered some very interesting ground.
Unexpected. I didn't think we'd go where we did. Actually.
Well, it was interesting, I thought. I think we went off at some very interesting topics. Maybe some stuff that listeners of the first episode maybe didn't appreciate or didn't connect with AI security. And, well, I quite like that. I quite like the fact that maybe that got some people thinking that there's a little bit more to it than just the tools and the tech and the shiny stuff. There's a lot of human elements to think about there.
Interesting you put it that way, by the way. Alan Turing was far more interested, most people don't realize, he was far more interested in what machines would do for the human-to-human dialogue than he was, as we seem to interpret it today, in a dialogue with machines. But of course, we alluded to him on the last one as well.
Absolutely. Alan has a lot to do with this, I think. He laid the foundation for a lot of this stuff, and he's a very, very interesting person.
He was a philosopher, really, in addition to a mathematician. And because of that, we have computer science now.
Absolutely. And he's responsible for all of that. Now, in this second episode, it's very interesting. We're calling it the democratization of AI. Now, normally, we use the D word. It comes to data, normally. We usually talk about the democratization of data and how we're using that ourselves, businesses. What's our relationship to information? Now, for our conversation, we're connecting the D word to AI security. And that's very, very interesting because I guess in the first episode, we did touch on a great deal on the human aspects of what that means, not just the tech.
We also talked about nuclear energy at one point and the pluses and minuses.
And all the rest of that, absolutely. So it's very interesting that we then move to a topic where we're talking about AI security within the context of you and I. How we appreciate what these tools can do for us, how we use them, how we must not abuse them, and all the rest of it. So for you, when you're sort of communicating these ideas to Zscaler's customer base, is that an interesting conversation? Is that even coming up in the conversation? Is it still shiny stuff and tools that we want to apply, or are people actually thinking, no? It's absolutely right down to the individual worker that we're talking about. Ultimately, AI security is about you and I. It's about how we use these tools.
So I think we should have a couple of conversations, and let's actually say three, because when I speak with customers, it's funny. They did this study years ago. What do physicists speak about at physics conventions? And it turns out the number one thing they speak about is their kids.
Yeah, okay.
Right? I mean, you wouldn't think that. But this is human beings. So when we get around the watering hole, yes, we do speak about business. We also speak about family and about interests. And so there's three things around AI that I speak to customers about. One is the sort of societal implications and what is happening in the technology itself in AI.
Yeah.
The second is about AI in the business. And then the third is about AI in security and what it means with Zscaler's technology and stuff like that. All three happen. And I think that's important because people want context. And so when you say democratization of AI and security, actually we have first this notion of democratization and technology.
Indeed.
And then AI and democratization, and then AI and security, and then you put all three together.
Yes.
And I think it's really important because, we used to have this notion, two notions that were critical. One was that dirigist or central economies had inefficiencies in them.
Yeah.
That meant that ultimately they couldn't be as efficient as sort of free market economies, right? This was built into Western thinking. The second thing was that naturally technology would help with democratization in general and a leveling of class structures in society. Mm-hmm. Here's the ironic thing, is that whenever we have this progress must lead to something good belief structure, and it's a belief structure, it doesn't necessarily have to pan out that way. We don't recognize it that it is a faith thing. There's a fascinating book by Neil Stephenson for a bunch of reasons called Seven Eves. And in it, he comes up with this term amistics, Amistics. It's based on Amish, amistics. And the notion is that based on culture, cultures will put technology to uses that are not necessarily unavoidable. They're not destinies for technology. We tend to think, oh, a technology has come, let's see where it goes, it will fulfill its potential.
Absolutely.
And that's not actually true. What happens is technologies have biases and channels that they kind of think in or grow in, and technology gets into those channels. And so if you think about that, it flips it around and says technology has not got inevitable ways it has to go. We're not on there's this notion of Moloch's demon, by the way, which is that and it comes up in the nuclear context as well, that you're on this treadmill and that you can't help where it's going. We have it with the climate. Right. And we have to remember that actually technology serves us and that we can make it go where we want. And I think that's very important, but it isn't inevitably going to do anything. So in other words, technology isn't inevitably going to lead to democratization. And here's the coda, unless we make it.
Yeah, we drive it.
Right. And so that's very, very important. And back to that first idea of dirigiste and centrist economies, guess what, folks? It can be a tool of tyranny as readily as it can democracy. And so the inefficiencies of a centrally managed economy and government can be overcome with technology just as readily as technology can serve democratization.
Yes, and I guess for you then, in effect, Zscaler sits at the intersection of all those three things.
We do, but let's so we put that to one side, all the stuff I just said, because now we bring AI into the picture, and AI is another voice as it is evolving. At the moment, it's largely a very intelligent parrot, and it's holding a mirror up to us. But now we get to the notion that it is taking rote tasks, and it is able to introduce efficiencies in execution that let us step back and think in a more creative way. So, in other words, in general tasks, it does the boring stuff, so that execution becomes more transparent. In the philosophy of science and technology, there's the notion of where your attention goes. It's called attenuating. Is your attention are you attenuating to the tool or to the task?
Yeah.
And the more you're spending on the tool, think in IT, 70%, 80% of our energy goes on keeping the lights on, right? As opposed to on the task, which is the service to the business. If we flipped it around, imagine what we would do. If we ceased to think of ourselves as custodians of IT, but rather brokers of IT, and then what would we spend our time doing? That's a revolutionary way of thinking of transformation of IT. The same is true of security.
Yeah. So ultimately, then, do you think that from a business perspective, when they're looking at security, how can we enhance that with AI?
Precisely.
If we're going to do that, then really it's not a case of a blanket application. It has to be.
Right.
You have to look at the detail, the granular, and I guess the granules are.
We're back to that deduction, right? To the cog in the machine.
Yeah, humans again. It's that personalization. Maybe the democratization is wrong. Maybe it's not wrong. Maybe it's more about personalized. It's more about looking at AI security from an absolutely personalized perspective, because it would be different from mine to yours because of
it might instead
jobs,
be,
etc.
It might instead be helping us to up level and be more creative.
Yeah.
So first of all, we have to worry about something called leaky abstraction, which is when you create an abstraction layer, you have to understand how it works below the hood, under the bonnet, so to speak, right? Because if you don't, the machine will give you what you expect. So this is where we get to making sure the logic is correct from a philosophy perspective.
So are you also then talking about, which I think is also a big pressure point and an issue for businesses, that they look at AI in general, then they look at AI through the perspective of security, and for them, it's still a black box.
Yeah,
they can't penetrate the box and understand what's going on.
Well, that's just it. So on the one hand, you have people able to learn more quickly because of AI. Right. So imagine as AI is producing more efficient versions of itself that can help with execution better, You now have, first it made me throw up in my mouth a little bit when I heard the word prompt engineer, and I realized, no, it is engineering.
Prompt engineer, yeah.
Right? But it is a thing. And,
Yeah.
because now I understand it better from when I first understood it. But you can't leap to that. It's like when my children said, Dad, why can't I have a calculator in school? I said, oh, you will, and you will very soon. But once you know the arithmetic, you need to know the calculator is giving you the right results. And so you need to know the philosophy of logic to know that the result of the output of the LLM or the Gen AI is logical. And you need to be able to validate the output. The same is true when it writes code for you. And the same is true when it helps you do a hunt. And so you need to understand where the data comes and when it goes in, especially because in an adaptive system, the opponent could take advantage of automation or how your LLM or your Gen AI works, or whatever comes next. So let's put that to one side for a second and say, okay, so some of the machinery now, you don't have to put your attention on the tool. Because when you're learning computer science and when you're learning especially cyber, so much of your attention is spent setting the lab up and then trying to figure out how to integrate them and then trying to figure out how to input the script.
Yep.
And now what if that's trivial? Now you're spending more of your attention up in the task land. You're learning faster, right? Once you've figured out the calculator, the math, you can use the calculator now, and then you can use the spreadsheet. And so now you're thinking about the P&L, to use a finance example. You're not worried about the arithmetic. You know arithmetic. But now you're actually thinking about the P&L and you're thinking about business on the finance example. Now, in the cyber example, you learn the tool, you understand the principles and the network and so on, and you're getting more quickly to the notion of playing with the ideas. I remember in the old days, you'd have to think, what question do I want to ask? And you'd have to go over to your logs and figure out, okay, how do I script it? I asked the question, and you'd have to wait hours, sometimes days. And when the answer came back, you'd have to think, why did I ask this? Right? And then you have to figure out what do you do with it next? You don't have to do that now.
So ultimately then, it seems to me that the systems that you're describing, what you must be very, very aware of is not to get lazy around AI. Not to let the system literally grab the nose ring and pull you in whichever direction it wants you to move in.
Right.
That's very, very, very risky, particularly from a security point of view, because you're handing the keys almost to the kingdom to this system and then trusting it. But trust is a I think that's another conversation, because that's about how you set the thing up, bias, and all the rest of it. That's
but now it's actually there's some other things incumbent upon it. You're right. You have to. You're trusting a system to integrate with yourself. You're almost outsourcing certain functions. It's a lot like what we do with people, right?
Yeah, indeed.
But you no longer can pat yourself on the back for the basics. Oh, I know how to write a script and set up the system. You can't pat yourself on the back for that. You now have a responsibility to up-level your game. I had a mentor years ago, Lieutenant Commander Robert Garrigue, and he said to me, much is expected of those to whom much is given. Well, that's true now of all of us.
Yeah.
Right? So now that you have been given AI assistance, and now that you have been given better data structures and better integrations and better architectures with things like zero trust, it's time to do better things.
Do you think we're in a different era then, where we are moving very, very quickly to a point where, well, I think we touched on this earlier, didn't we? We sort of touched on it in the first episode, where I guess we were talking about what does an AI-enhanced security look like today, and what would it look like in the future? If we are rapidly moving towards that future, it seems to me that will be really coloured, and it will be driven by you and I. It will be driven by how we change our behaviour, how we use these tools, how we put them into our daily work, and what that means for security as a whole. Now, that can be all the way down to something simple like opening an attachment, which is still a massive problem for security, all the way through to really threat actors on a massive scale looking for chinks in the armor of huge blue chip corporates and everything in between. And I think that often delivers a little bit of, in fact, in some cases, quite a large amount of paralysis for some businesses. Where are we on that spectrum? Where do we begin? Which tools are for us? Education, exit and training. Yeah. All of these things have to be thought about. And that's quite a heady mix.
It is
to get right.
Look, I love Futurism, by the way, because so let's deal with a few things. So number one, if you predict things, and especially specific things about threats, and people listen to you, then they'll take you seriously, but the bad guys will do different things.
Yeah,
and
indeed.
so it won't happen, right? So you have to give meaningful advice on how to, in particular, manage risk and give people advice on how to play the game as opposed to what is going to happen, which is not as satisfying as somebody who says, on the 14th, a worm will take out Wall Street, right? I mean, that's not as satisfying.
Yeah.
Secondly, it is actually easier. One futurist I read years ago said to predict the far future than the near future.
Yeah.
And so actually, the ones who've done really well, Jules Verne once wrote a book called Paris in the 20th Century, and he got it pretty right. He imagined Paris 100 years in the future in the 1960s. He got it pretty close. Strangely, if you go check that out. Another one was Arthur C. Clarke actually predicted 50 years to the future at one point. He got it pretty close. But here's the thing, predicting the ultimate end state, you don't just jump to it. And what happens in between is where fortunes will rise and fall and companies will get hacked or not. And so it actually matters to be in the now. And what I find is important is to monitor trends and to look for what really happens, because otherwise you get stuck in the FUD world, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Yep.
And you get stuck in the, well, everything could happen. Yeah. So you've kind of got to play, you have to play the game of what if, and then you ask yourself, well, what's highly likely to happen, or if it happens is going to have a big impact. Okay. Now we've got those. We understand them. How do we reduce that? Okay. Then you say, what breakout things do I have to be monitoring carefully? And then you watch for what emerges, because by and large, they don't happen overnight. It's rates of change. And so look at a breakout thing from a societal perspective was Gen AI. But in terms of the impact it had within cyber, it wasn't immediate. In fact, the impact's being felt now. You can see it. Most people don't realize in the rate of efficiency in malware is going up. And it's not immediately visible because it doesn't grab headlines like it did when they were talking about driving cars and maybe taking over the world, which was a lot of hype. And now it's starting to actually produce those cogs in machines that is turning up in everything. It's turning up in podcasting recording software, for instance, right? That's the sort of thing you can actually adapt to. So I usually advise people put together groups that monitor trends and mega trends. That's more interesting, and you still have time to adapt to these things. So I would say to cyber people, here's what I would say, and I do say, is get agile. So move money from CapEx long-term investments to OpEx, because that gives you the flexibility to change your budget. Get out of the business of having large stacks of hardware and move into software as a service. Reduce complexity in your stack. And obviously, you want to make sure that you have to maintain or improve, but position yourself to maintain and improve user experience. And you don't have to make trade-offs. Look for the architectural changes that give you more discretionary budget to make bets. And what I mean by bets is and I think in the last episode we had, I talked about my CFO who talked about, CISOs and security departments want toys.
Yeah.
Well, so if we know that, get rid of some of the older toys, or spend less on them, and move money to a discretionary budget that lets you try out toys that are going to say, is this producing value or isn't it? So things like a zero trust strategy actually say, let's go to a simplified IT stack, and let's go to less risk and free up budget to make some of those bets for the emerging risks.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. That's an absolute tangible and practical, I guess, how you move forward. That's how you can put that into a
business strategy.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a realistic strategy, and that's kind of that's what every business is trying to do. That's interesting. You talk about futurism and far-reaching trends, etc. Are you an advocate of a lot of this stuff which goes on in other areas of IT, this whole idea of being more proactive, doing proactive analytics, this kind of thing? What will happen in the future? Can we predict that? Therefore, can we be ready for a product or service, wherever it is? Now, in this conversation, is that possible? Does AI give you that crystal ball? Does it give you that?
Absolutely. If you send me some money, I'll send you the secret answers. No.
You go,
the answer is the devil's in the details, right? And I think there's no substitute for how you do security.
Yeah.
Right. What are your architectural principles? What are your first principles? I'm a physicist by training, right? Originally.
Sure.
So I don't like to just memorize formulae. I like to go back to first principles. And so I do the same thing in cybersecurity, and I teach it as well. So I try to teach people have to know the lingo, right? What's a botnet, etc. Right?
Yeah,
What is private key encryption? But after that, it's really about first principles.
Mm.
And so if you go back to those, then you can make decisions that can radically change your tech stack and how you manage security. It's one of the reasons I teach basic security, because a lot of folks will be like, "Oh, basics, blah blah blah." No. If you can't explain it simply, and you can't explain it to people in radically different fields, and you either don't know it well enough, or you're not questioning your fundamentals enough.
Well, I think that happens a lot to Sam.
Oh, it does to everyone. It's human nature, so you've got to challenge yourself.
It's crazy because you have conversations that, we're rushing ahead with, we have this new fantastic piece of AI for our security, etc. You go, okay, so if you did have a breach, etc., what's your contingency plans like? Have you looked at your fundamental backups yet? What's happening with those? Have you looked at those recently? Not so much. Well, then that's not really going to fly, is it? That's like.
Nope.
The horse has bolted, guys. It's gone, and well, what are you going to do? So it's one of those things that it's multifaceted, and everything moves, if you like, forward together. But get the basics right. I think that's what you're saying. You have to build this from a foundation of understanding the basics. Get that right first, guys, before you start layering on these interesting technologies like AI. Now, another wrinkle with this, which I wanted to ask you about, is regulation. It's frameworks. This stuff is coming thick and fast from every pore, it seems to me, whether in the US or in Europe. A lot of stuff coming along to regulate AI in inverted commas. I'm waving my hands about there. What's your take on that? Do you feel that for businesses, regulation can be, I guess it can be a push because it mandates you will do this with your AI, or more importantly, you will not do this with your AI. And do you think that moves the conversation forward, or does that put the shackles on? What's your view of the current state of regulatory frameworks?
Well, I think let's come at the end to the discussion of regulatory frameworks with AI. Let's deal with the general case. The reason that regulations come out and the laws on behavior come out like this is because you're not doing something you otherwise should be doing.
Indeed.
So FFIEC came out in the US because people weren't doing strong authentication for banking.
Yeah, indeed.
And they weren't keeping logs for banking. So came a rule that said you should. Now, what happens is the pattern is this. Those who do it first, there's usually a grandparent clause. You don't have to do it. You got some time, but then eventually they go, enough. You have to do it.
Yeah.
And you see this time and time again. And then the specificity goes up. Not only do you have to do it, you have to do it this way. And then not only do you have to do it this way, the fines go up. So HIPAA fines went for privacy from 5,000 up into the tens of thousands and higher. And in the case of atomic energy regulation and energy regulation in general, that went into the millions per incident. Because if you don't get the behavior you want, then the tightening happens. And so then you'll see that the first wave of regulations that we've had recently was around data sovereignty and privacy. And obviously there was the GDPR one, but we've seen others. In Europe, we've recently had NIS2 and DORA, which is more generally to change behaviors, right? And in the US, we've had critical infrastructure regulations, and we've had SEC, let's just say guidance, and then more aggressive behavior. But that is to change something people wouldn't otherwise do. And now every country has data sovereignty laws coming out. Canada has a new one. India has one. Well, then we get to the AI part. Well, the AI part says, never has a technology swept so quickly, to the best of my knowledge. ChatGPT got to over 100 million users in 2 months?
Something like that.
And it was the first tech that crossed the Uncanny Valley. Right? In the public media. I mean, it happened everywhere, but in the public, in the mainstream, and the Uncanny Valley is as things start to look more human. I know you know this, but for our listeners, if they don't, as they look more human, they reach a point where it's almost human, it gets creepy. And that it's like a valley, it just plummets and you hate it, right? But it crossed that, and suddenly people fell in love with their chats. And they started to think they needed freeing. So they were imputing not just sentience, but they were imputing humanity to it. And so be it, that's a human trait that we do that. But that's one of the reasons it went vertical so quickly. And it started to find potential applications everywhere. Under the height, Cory Doctorow talked about bubbles. He said every industry, bubbles happen. and this is a bubble. He said, but the real question is, do they leave value behind or not? And
Yes.
this is leaving value behind,
Indeed.
a lot like
Indeed.
the telco bubble left, fiber optic cables around, or .com left the internet as we know it today as a commercial entity. So this is doing that. People will rise and fall their fortunes on the basis of this, but it is leaving value behind and changing the way we do things. So the government, it makes sense. They're actually having discussions. And there was an executive order that came out in the US. Other countries have done similar things. In fact, as we record this, we just had a memorandum of understanding between the UK and the US on furthering these dialogues about safety.
Yep, indeed.
And by the way, we did this with cars. We did it with alcohol. In various ways. We did it with planes. I would be surprised if we didn't.
I think that's that's right, because our relationship with technologies through the ages have been just that. I guess it gets to a point where you think, well, you really shouldn't be doing that, and we're going to tell you not to, and we're going to make it illegal.
We don't have people running around with piles of uranium in the private sector.
There you go,
a license.
Absolutely. Right? But I don't know. Maybe AI is because of the ChatGPT explosion and bubble. Maybe that's because it became something that was ultimately very personal. I always liken it to the Turing test. There's Mr. Turing again. And that idea that, how do you know you're not talking to a person? Now, they did this years ago, decades ago, didn't they? And there was that interesting test years ago when we used to call what we now call LLMs. They were just they were just expert systems, weren't they?
Yeah.
And I believe they built one for, I think it was, they tried to build one like a GP, give it as much information so it was like a doctor. Sit someone down, have a conversation with this thing through a computer, and then we'll ask you how you felt about that experience later. Was it a human or was it a machine? But the interesting stuff that came out of that, if memory serves, was that I'd rather go and speak to that machine again.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak to a human. I'd rather speak to the machine. That's very, very...
There's a scene in Demolition Man where the San Angeles Police Department, probably making a mistake, someone answers the phone and says, you've reached the person, if you'd prefer a recording, press, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Which is funny, but this is interesting because Alan Turing's Turing test wasn't what people think it is. If you go back and read it, he hung out with the Cambridge philosophy set, right, at the time. That's why I said he was a philosopher earlier. Yeah. In his day, a computer was a person, by the way. It wasn't. That's what the language says now. It's a machine.
Right, absolutely.
It was a person who did calculations. So when you read it, you have to read with that in mind. And there's a famous puzzle that was called at the time, it may not have aged well, I think it was called the Chinese translation hypothesis or analogy, where you have somebody in a machine who doesn't understand Chinese, and two people are communicating through this box. They put something in on one side, and the person has a lexical thing they look up for the characters, and they don't understand the characters, and so it comes in one side, and they find the appropriate response to put out on the other side, and out it goes. And they said, is this intelligent behavior as they pass messages back and forth? No. But actually, the question that came out of some of the musings of Alan Turing was, it doesn't matter. What matters is why it's being done and what happens after the person comes out of the box. And that's interesting because when you read his first musings on what's now called the Turing test, he was interested in what machines did for the human-to-human talks and the phraseology. And how did they change it? Because in his first examples, he was actually trying to infer the gender of the person on the other side of the wall with that machine example, because the purpose was to see if you were going to go for a coffee after.
Yeah.
And this mattered in his world because gender mattered for him. And that's lost sometimes when people don't realize that. So what's funny is we talk about human-to-machine dialogue when he actually cared about human-to-human dialogue and the role of machines in it.
Absolutely, yes.
And that's where we're at now.
That's like I was about to say. It's interesting, isn't it? That's really when we're talking about AI, we're talking about security. We're talking about what the threat actors are. Well, guess what? The threat actors are humans, just like you.
That's right.
So
and they have
yes,
a purpose after in many cases,
absolutely.
which is stealing or breaking in or
whatever it
or
is.
doing business, right?
Yeah. So remember that. Put that into into your equation when you're looking at AI security for your business. Let's not forget, threat actors are humans. The people that you need to defend your business are probably your staff. Guess what? They're humans. So that's a very interesting perspective that often gets lost in by the new shiny stuff.
Yeah.
That whole idea of it's a system which sits on there as an overlord overseeing a system. Blah blah blah. Yeah, to a point, guys, but that is not the end game.
No.
Throughout, I think all these conversations here, the end game is really improving, what your people are and improving your business to become security centric.
Yeah,
that's really about education.
Well, actually, I'm going to push back on that. I don't think it's about the business becoming security centric. I think it's about the business doing business better with less risk, acceptable risk for acceptable return. So now, I used to have a boss many years ago. Actually, I'll say who it was. It was Art Coviello. And I said, oh, you got to be data centric and identity centric. And he said to me, I don't know if he remembers this. He said, Mr. Curry, you can't be centric about two things. And he was right, by the way. He was absolutely right. What I meant was, of course, that you had to pay attention to both. But I really, language matters in this.
Yeah.
And so why does a business exist? Well, for acceptable risk for acceptable return. And so in taking capital and making a machine that makes more money, it is effectively a machine and a system that includes people and computers and data. And it exists in an environment that we have built that's a fantastically complex one. Some of the qualities of the system include getting processes. They include human systems and machine systems and the interaction among them. And security is a quality throughout. So I don't think businesses need to be, security centric, but they have to have security in the fabric of what they do.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you meant, but I wanted to push back on the way we said it because nobody says, hey, let's make a company that just runs security stuff.
So do you think ultimately, if we're going to do AI security very, very well, do you think it ultimately means, our humans, you and I, we need to be more like the machines? Is that ultimately where we're moving to? Or there's, an absolute symbiotic relationship there? AI does what it does very well. I do what I do extremely well. And hopefully the product is very good security.
Well, yeah, I think the end result is very good risk management and minimizing of risk and maximizing of the efficiency of that machine. But your question is a really good one because I think we're going into a phase of where we got to this point in AI because we started to have convergence. We had new data structures, new ways of doing that, and new compute and new scale. But we also found a lingua franca, almost literally, among the different types of AI research. Now we're going to see like an hourglass, it came together. Now we're going to see speciation as it spreads apart and finds those different cogs that it can apply to. Now, there'll still be common base of advancement, but each of those applications is going to have its own, and we're already seeing it, ways of interacting with different parts of the environment and with each other as those cogs fit into different machines. But to answer the question very directly, I think humans should do what humans do well, and machines should do what machines do well for that period of assisted humans being the dominant play, the interplay with what machines do well and what we do well for the time being, until machines think like we do or better. Then I think they should do what they do well, and we should do what we do well, and we should seek that symbiosis, as you called it. Because tuning that as they specialize, and we focus on being whatever prompt engineering turns into, that's going to be interesting for getting maximum efficiency in the security job, which is translated into least waste for the business, best service to the business, least risk for the business. And frankly, when you do it right, it opens up all the right opportunities for that machine to address new markets and do new things. And that's why we're here.
Well, unfortunately, I've run out of time for this episode. To learn more about how businesses can enhance its security with practical application of AI, please do visit Zscaler.com for more insights and begin your enterprise's journey towards an AI-enhanced security future. I'd like to thank Sam for his expert insights. In the next and final episode of this series, we'll be taking a closer look at how businesses can defend themselves and what an offensive AI security stance looks like and what the future holds for AI security. Until next time, it's goodbye from me and it's goodbye from Sam.
Thank you. Have a good one.